Hi, in this video, we are going to talk about setting the scope of quantitative research. So what are your study's limitations? In this lesson, you should be able to identify the scope, limitation, and the delimitation of your study. Construct a well-written scope and limitations of your study. So what are the boundaries of your study? This is the question that is answered by the scope and the delimitation of your research paper. Okay. So when we say scope is the general extent of the content that will be covered by your study. So ibig sabihin, ano yung overall coverage ng study mo? So that is the scope. Hanggang saan? Saan nag-uumpisa at saka hanggang saan nag-i-end. So, anong specifically is the focus of your study? So, that's the scope of your study. Example, when the title of your study is the relationship of the perception of grade 12 students on educational math videos and their math dispositions. So, with this title, your scope would be that your content is about perceptions of the students, grade 12 students, on the educational math videos. So, not any other kinds of videos, but it's all about educational math videos and their mathematical dispositions. So, when we say math dispositions, hindi ito tumutukoy dun sa any other kind of dispositions, but specifically on mathematical dispositions. Alright? And yung participants ng study natin are grade 12 students. Okay, so that's an example of a scope. Now, what is the importance of understanding the scope of your study? With the help of the content of the scope of your study, it gives you the understanding. It makes you identify the general purpose and the direction of your study. So, in short, it makes you more focused on the content of the study. Okay? Ano naman yung tinatawag na limitation? So, when we say limitations, these are the potential weaknesses in a study that are not within your control as a researcher. Ibig sabihin, hindi mo makokontrol. Alright? Example, yung time frame na binigay sa inyo. So, when you conduct the study, the time element is very important. But if you are limited on that, it may affect the outcome of your study. Okay, so it's one of the limitations. You don't have control over it. Another example, let's say you have the title, Relationship of Customer Service and Training of Food Service Crew. Okay, Relationship of Customer Service and Training of Food Service Crew. Another type of limitation would be the research design. Okay, the research design. Here, it says relationship. So, meaning to say the research design is correlation. Okay, correlation about relationship between variables. So, when we say correlation, that's one of the limitations, ano? Kasi correlation determines the strength of the relationship and not the causation. Ibig sabihin, hanggang relationship lang. Hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na yung study would also determine if customer service causes training of food service crew or the other way around. Because the study is only about their relationship. Okay, so that's one of the limitations. So that is why sa scope and the delimitations of your study, you need to specify kung anong research design ang ginamit. Okay? So, limitations are sometimes found in the research design of the study. So, yun na nga yung example. Next, we also have what we call delimitation. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng, anong kaibahan ng limitation at ng delimitation? Okay? Delimitation are specific characteristics that limit the scope of your study, and these are set by the researchers themselves. Ibig sabihin, yung researchers yung nagsiset ng limit na ito. Okay? That's the delimitations. Again, ang limitation, walang control yung researchers dyan. Ang delimitations, yung researcher mismo ang naglilimit. Okay? Bakit may mga delimitations ang mga researchers? Okay. to make the research more feasible. Okay? Para maging kaya or para maging posible yung research, yung conduct ng research study. Okay? Delimitations help your study become more feasible or doable. Okay? Kasi minsan, hindi kaya ng researcher yung maraming masyadong respondents. Okay? Kaya i-delimit ng researcher. Okay? I-limit niya yung sample size. Okay? That's one example of the delimitations. Example. Title of your study is Weekly Income of 2 Small-Scale Thrift Stores in Maykawayan City, a Comparative Study. Okay. Ano bang delimitation dito? Ang delimitation na sinet ng researcher ay ang weekly income. Kasi pwede namang monthly income or annual income. Diba? Pero, sa nag-conduct ng researcher na ito, dinilimit niya, the researcher delimits the study into weekly income. Okay? It could be that hindi kaya ng panahon niya or hindi kaya ng time frame ng researcher to study about the monthly income. Okay? Kaya dinilimit niya into weekly income. Okay. So, what are the factors in writing limitation and delimitation? Ano bang i-consider natin for the limitations and the delimitation? Of course, unang-una yung sample size. So, limit the sample size of the study. Okay? So, sample size is a factor that the researcher can choose. Okay? So, pwedeng iset ni researcher yan. So, that's an example of delimitation. No? Yung sample size. Profile of your sample. Choose only the profiles relevant to your study. Huwag mo nang isali yung civil status, kung married or single, kung hindi naman importante dun sa study mo. Okay? So, limit the profile or the information included in your survey. Design of your study. The result is only limited based on the chosen research design. Yung example nga kanina, correlational research design. So, hindi siya pwedeng maging about causation. Okay? Kasi ano lang siya, relationship. Study on the relationship. Hindi siya study on, study on the effect of or factors of. So, hindi siya ganon. Magkaiba sila. The data collection and the research instrument. So, the interpretation of your study will be limited to the research instrument used. So, dito naman, you should also consider, ano bang research instrument ang ginamit mo? Ano bang data collection procedure ang ginamit? Okay? Yung time frame, of course, your study has a limited time frame of completion. So, makikita natin sa example mamaya yan. And of course, yung financial resources. Be practical and realistic. So, hindi pwedeng magsiset ka ng study that would require you to interview everybody in the country, which is not allowed or hindi siya feasible, no, with regards to your financial resources. Okay? So, you should also consider your financial resources. And access to literature. Some relevant and related literature are difficult to access. So, when you conduct a study, make sure that there is sufficient amount of literature that can back up, ano mo tawag doon, that could support your results. And kasunod ng null hypothesis is the scope and delimitation. Scope and delimitation. So, what is that? The scope and the delimitation, it tells the readers the scope of your study. Saan ang limit niya? Hanggang saan lang siya? And you may also tell your readers the problems and the challenges that you encountered when you conducted the study. Okay? So, again, scope and delimitation, hanggang saan lang ang scope ng study mo, and hanggang saan lang ang limit niya. Ano yung hindi covered ng study mo? Ano yung hindi kasali sa study mo? Ano yung mga problems and challenges na na-encounter mo when you conducted the study? So, this is an example of a scope and delimitation from a study conducted last year, senior high school. So, let's take this for example. This is on internet addiction and buying behavior of senior high school students. So the general purpose of this study was to determine the relationship of social media addiction and buying behavior among senior high school students. The respondents were given the same questionnaire to answer. Additionally, this study focused on the senior high school students in a private secondary school in Barangay Ilang of the present year 2019-2020. O dito, dinescribe niya lang kung saan banda ang school, but we are not allowed to disclose the name of the school because of Data Privacy Act. So, hindi natin pwedeng ibigay kung ano pangalan ng school talaga. So, pwede nating ibigay ang location at saka maganda dito, ito yung scope ng study niya. So, yung mga estudyante lang na present nun sa school year 2019-2020. Okay? At saka senior high school din siya. Yun yung mga isa sa mga scope ng study niya. So, it delimits that the study may not be as sufficient as it needs to be since there was only a short period of time. So, yun yung naging challenge sa study na ito kasi yung time frame na binigay sa kanila is very short. Okay, so sabi dito, there was only a short period of time given in conducting the study. Inadequate time frame, sabi niya, greatly contributes to the overall outcome of the research study. Okay? So that's it for the scope and delimitation. Kasunod ng scope and delimitation is the review of related literature. But we are going to discuss that in our next meeting, sa next video na naman.